have a bill that has been introduced at the request of Senator Brzezinski, the Judiciary Chair. It's currently a committee bill. It's Senate Bill 179. I'll put a link to it in the chat. And what that bill will do is make permanent the changes that were made in the short session. We do expect a little more conversation on this. There's some talk about making sure that the use of powered recreational devices, so e-bikes, powered skateboards, scooters, would also be subject to, we would also have immunity for injuries stemming from the use of those items as well. That's where we're at on this. My feeling right now is I feel like we're in a really good situation on this bill. First week of session, everything's subject to change, but we do have some enthusiasm for a permanent fix. I'll also note there are some other recreational immunity conversations taking place in the legislature as well related to the signing of waivers. I don't know where the league is going to end up on all of those bills. I think our primary purpose is to protect our members going into and making sure that sunset is lifted so cities can plan and know they have that protection in place. So that's where we are right now on rec community. Happy to take questions when we're ready for that.
Hey, Scott, why don't you move straight into the behavioral health enhancements, since that also fits within your portfolio? I think
Sure.
For everybody who's online here, just a quick heads up. For some reason, we're capped at 100 here, so we're trying to get this thing fixed. We know our audience is much larger than that. The good news is this thing is to be recorded, and we'll be able to make the distribution once we get the download. So go ahead, Scott.
Oh. Okay, happy to talk behavioral health. This was one of the top priorities as voted on by the members during our committee after our committee process. Cities aren't typically, and in most regards, behavioral health service providers, but we do end up dealing with what happens when those services are not adequately provided to Oregonians. And so where the league is engaged right now in the behavioral health question is updating Oregon civil commitment laws to make sure that try to make those more focused on positive patient outcomes. Right now, it's very difficult in the state of Oregon for a person who needs help to be civilly committed. There are instances where people even ask for it and they're not able to be committed under the current statute. There are ongoing work group conversations taking place in the Capitol right now to determine what that looks like. We're actively engaged with our other public safety partners, so that's the chiefs, the sheriffs, the district attorneys. I think what's really interesting about the conversation this time around is that the behavioral health advocates are more closely aligned to where the public safety lobby is, and so it's very exciting that we now have these new partners in these conversations. There's not complete agreement on how this should be crafted, but that's why we have work groups. So you please expect to hear more about this in the bulletin and on these calls moving forward. I would also say that we are part of this conversation. It's driven by families who have been impacted by our lack of behavioral health access, suicide impacted families, behavioral health impacted families. There's a lot of energy around this, and I'm feeling pretty good about this conversation again after the first week of session. So the other part where we're engaging is we know we don't have capacity in our system to treat and in secure facilities the expanded population we would expect from an update to our civil commitment statute. So we are working very closely with our county partners to develop what the Ways and Means ask will be for both bricks and mortar facilities as well as training and workforce development. One of the biggest hindrances to adequately meeting our Oregon's behavioral health need demand is the workforce just isn't really there. So addressing that will be also part of that priority. And these are behavioral health is a big topic, and these were the issues where the league felt it could be most relevant in those conversations. So again, happy to take questions when we get to that.
Thanks very much, Scott. So next up, we've got shelter funding and homeless response. Again, an issue that's been incredibly important to our members, especially those members that have set up shelter throughout the pandemic. So I'm going to turn this back to Alexandra.
Hi, folks. So as many of you know, if you've been tracking kind of the homeless services, homeless shelter conversation for quite a while, it's relatively new for the state to be involved in the funding of our homeless services system at the shelter level. They may have funded, rental assistance and, other rehousing assistance, things like that here and there. But really, it's only been since 2020 that our state has become involved in this shelter system. And I think we've not had historically kind of a funding or systematic approach to how we fund shelter, which leaves, cities and a number of different entities kind of out of the conversation. I think over the course of this interim, Representative Marsh and the governor got together a conversation, which I know a number of cities involved on this call, as well as counties and homeless services providers, as well as the LOC were involved in to come up with a more systematic approach to how we fund shelter as a state. It's not a perfect system, certainly for cities. I think there are still a couple of gaps in the system. It is more encouraging of local cooperation, local collaboration that, will end potentially in a greater level of funding flowing into your communities, but it does not look like at this time we are going to see direct funding allocations for cities. There is a big number floating out there for shelter funding for this session. The governor has asked for $217.9 million for shelter funding, which is a huge number. And I want to acknowledge that and appreciate kind of the emphasis on the funding for this one. But to be very candid, that is only enough funding to fund those already previously state funded shelters. That does not account for any shelters, you as cities may have set up. I know a number of cities are operating their own shelters and facing their own budget shortfalls, which will affect their ability to continue operating those shelters into the next biennium. LOC will be advocating for, 217 million to be a baseline amount that we for shelters this session. As we know that the governor and Representative Marsh have recognized the need to fund, city shelters and some of these non-traditional, non-congregate models like vehicular safe park and Conestoga huts or whatever you want to call it, the little tiny homes. Folks have different names for them in different localities. So that's going to be an exciting conversation this session. It will certainly kick off more with the budget process, which will begin in late February, early March, at least on the housing side of things. So keep an eye out. And I'll go ahead and drop my contact information in the chat just for anyone who has additional questions on any of the issues I cover here today.
Great. Alexandra, thanks so much. I'd like to bring Jenna Jones back in. Those of you who recall, Jenna used to be on staff here before going off to lobby for another organization and is now back and is heading up our tax and finance components. So lodging tax flexibility, Jenna, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for the introduction, Jim. So I will breeze past that and just put my contact in the chat. But local lodging taxes since 2003, any new and increased lodging taxes have been preempted by the state government. They have to be distributed, the revenues have to be distributed and spent on things based on a 70-30 split. So 70% of the revenues need to be spent on tourism promotion or tourism related facilities, and 30% is discretionary to the city. If you had a lodging tax before 2003, you have a more complicated distribution, and I will let you talk to your finance director about that. But for simple, what we're trying to do for the LOC priority is find a better way to balance tourism impacts to communities and funding those without having to use general fund dollars or other sorts of dollars. So we're hoping to get a bill that will add a third definition to the 70% that is restricted to include tourism impacted services. So that's your public safety and community infrastructure. So police, fire, search and rescue, EMS, all of those things. And then community infrastructure, your critical infrastructure, water, wastewater, transportation, but also parks, trails, public amenities like public restrooms, public parking lots, things that typically get used by tourists or maybe make or break why they want to visit your community because they know they can park right next to the beach and then go walk to the beach or anything like that. There are 106 cities who have local TLTs. So this is across the state. And so we're just trying to find a better way to have local governments who are already using the tax and have a tax in place to be able to use them more flexibly and balance the tourism economy and the community needs that are impacted by tourists. This is going to be a big fight. I'm not going to understate that. It's been a big fight and it hasn't been touched for over 22 years since 2003. I will say already this session, there are 7 lodging tax bills. 4 of them are dealing with the state's transient lodging tax, which they have touched over the last couple of years for the Eugene International Track Championships and things like that. And there are 3 local lodging tax bills right now. LOC's bill will drop in a couple of weeks. So a lot of conversation there. The Oregon Restaurant and Lodging Association is one of our biggest hurdles on this in this conversation. They believe that it's their money that we just collect for them to give back to them. But you all as elected officials, and if you have a transient lodging tax, are the ones who have to put it to your voters and do the legwork to get the tax in place. So that's going to be a big thing. Our biggest conversation with the state is going to be you continue to touch your own lodging tax, let us touch ours, since you decided to put a preemption in statute and see if we can get more flexibility. And flexibility doesn't mean you need to change your current agreements or how you spend your money if you don't want to. But we've heard from many folks, particularly on the coast near Mount Hood, in Bend, that their communities are being loved to death. And when their populations double, triple during the peak seasons, they don't need to promote their communities because people do know where they are. And they bring in enough people during the peak season that they could divest some of that promotion money to make good infrastructure upgrades to continue to support tourism. So that's what we've got. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. My information's in the chat.
Super. Thanks very much, Jenna. As you folks can tell, this really is a quick rundown on really kind of what the summary will look like. As we go forward, we'll probably have a little bit more in-depth conversations on some of this. With that, we've got 3 more items that we're going to get through. So addressing energy affordability challenges. Nolan, go ahead.
Thanks, Jim. So we're looking to address energy affordability challenges from rising utility costs. As many of you are aware, rising utility costs have really increased the energy burden on Oregonians. Many communities are also being impacted by power shutoffs, sometimes planned, and sometimes because of extreme weather like wildfires or ice storms, just to name a few. There are also many other reasons, including new investments, but one of the biggest drivers is also increased demand, especially demand created by the growing number of data centers necessary for artificial intelligence. So we are supporting actions to maintain affordable, reliable, and resilient energy resources, invest in programs and new technology that support energy efficiency, renewable energy, and battery storage to reduce overall energy cost and demands, and address grid challenges by supporting energy resilience while balancing the pace of energy production and supply that impacts our rates. So what can we do? One topic area is ensuring that high energy producers, especially data centers, are covering the costs of increased demand that's required to run them instead of passing those costs off to customers. Many community-owned utilities already do this. We are trying to ensure that the IOUs also have this capability, and I know advocates and legislators are working with them to make sure that the language will be workable. We are also supporting legislation that provides options for local governments and reduces the energy burden of Oregonians. We're supporting the governor's budget ask for an additional $25 million towards the Community Renewable Energy Grant Program, which provides funding for the planning or construction of renewable energy projects with an added bonus for projects that focus on energy resiliency. Attached that is a related bill, House Bill 2566, that would allow that same funding to be used for resiliency only projects, which I know is very important to a lot of communities. There is a package of microgrid enabling legislation in the House Climate, Energy, and Environment Committee that would clarify the ability to site microgrids and make it easier for local governments and partners to pursue microgrid projects that can actually be funded through the CREP funding, that Community Renewable Energy Grant Program funding. They are committee bills, and they're House Bills 2064, House Bill 2065, and House Bill 2066. There are also 4 bills related to allowing Oregon to pursue small modular reactors, also known as SMRs, that I've heard are important for many communities to have that as an option for reliable, non-carbon emitting energy. So if you have any interest in those, please reach out to me. I did put my email in the chat. And then lastly, there are several bills aimed at providing the Public Utility Commission, for those who don't know, also known as the PUC, but providing them additional tools in the rate making process that will allow them the ability to ensure rates are fair and reasonable, and to consider the economic impact of continued rate increases and the ability to be flexible with those increases, instead of having them all go in at one time. So we are working with advocates, utilities, the PUC, and legislators to determine the best path forward with these bills. So if you have any questions or interest in those, again, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'm happy to pass along the bill numbers and how I'll continue to update you as legislation moves forward and let you know how you can be helpful.
Thanks, Nolan. So just a heads up for folks, just a quick time check. We're going to go past the bottom end of the hour here as we finish up. So let's move next to Michael Martin with operator and training apprenticeships.
Great. Thank you, Jim. Again, Michael Martin, one of your lobbyists here at the League. Very exciting operator and training apprenticeships. There's a lot of early excitement and momentum on this. I like to think of our drinking water and wastewater operators as heroes amongst other local public servants, city officials, and there are going to be a lot of retirements over the next decade. And we need to make sure that we are training the next generation of folks. That's what this bill does. We don't have a bill number yet, but our draft should be coming back anytime soon. So look for alerts, and I'll keep you in touch on updates on this. But really excited to have an operator, a training apprenticeship bill this session going forward.
Super. Thanks very much again, Michael. And we're going to finish up with Alexandra, who's going to kind of take us through the work that she is doing on ORS 195, 530, also known as HB 3115, and multiple other explanations for what we're working on with the homeless rules. So go ahead.
Hi, folks. Back again. So Jim's correct. This goes by so many different names. Some people might call it Martin v. Johnson. Some folks might think of it as kind of how cities regulate public camping, so commonly referred to as time, place, manner. So I'm just gonna try to refer to it as regulating time, place, manner on public property, but that, you know, is not its only name. So LOC is working this session to try to address our state statute that we have regarding time, place, manner. LOC's proposed amendments are by no means intended to or have the goal of criminalizing homelessness. I think rather we aim to address kind of critical concerns and clarity that's much needed in the law as it currently is written. The current language is around objectively reasonable, which is a subject to varying interpretations by varying cities and localities, and it really has led to a patchwork of laws in our state that creates all kinds of confusion, both for community members and our cities and those experiencing homelessness. So as we're working kind of on the other issues with addressing housing stock and affordability and shelter, we're also going to be working on this and kind of addressing that lack of clarity in objectively reasonable and some of the concerns regarding the kind of legal risk that cities have under the current statute. Yeah, that's my quick summary. We do not have a bill as of yet. It is currently in drafting. It will either be dropped as its own separate bill or amended into one of the variety of full repeal bills that are out there. LOC is not pursuing full repeal, to be very candid. Partially, you know, I think our membership is in a variety of different places as to whether or not they'd like to see statute as it's currently written stand, or they would like full repeal, or they'd like modification, but also just very candidly because repeal is unlikely to pass the legislative process. And, you know, this is our best path forward to serve cities.
Super. Thanks very much. So again, like I said, this is pretty rapid fire. This is really intended to give you a sense on where those priorities are for the league working through this session. And want to make sure that folks understand, we didn't develop these without a very deliberative process within our policy committees. Those are all member-driven efforts. They worked through a meeting process, identified a number of different priorities, and then advanced 3 or 4 of those to there where we formed a physical ballot that every city had an opportunity over the course of the summer to vote on. And that's effectively how we select what our priorities look like. And then when the board met in October, they effectively ratified those priorities and then also added one more because we didn't have the benefit of a Supreme Court decision on Grants Pass v. Johnson. We do now. And that's why we added this element here that Alexander just got through talking about with ORS 195. So as I said, there'll be plenty more opportunities each week during the course of this session as we dial in a little bit more detail. And as I mentioned also, we only are bringing forward really active pieces of legislation where we need your assistance on it. That grassroots lobbying has been incredibly helpful for our work going forward. I'm going to take a few questions here if folks want to drop it into both chat or raise your hand, at least here for the next few minutes before we move into more of the transition to talk about City Day coming up on Tuesday. So I'll give folks a chance to populate the chat or raise your hand and we'll get to you.
Jim, while we're waiting for that, I'm just going to pass along some information. We do understand and have heard from several members and others that would like to have participated today, that they were not able to get on the Zoom. That was an oversight on our part. We used a Zoom account that had a capacity of 100 for webinars. Usually we've had well beyond that. That obviously will be corrected in time for next week. However, we are recording and we will be pushing out the recording of this via email within probably 30 minutes of our conclusion. So if you can help us out, if you happen to hear from any of your city colleagues that they were locked out, please let them know that we're aware of the problem and we will be sending them a recording so they can hear today's webinar. Thanks.
Thanks very much for that, Kevin. So I'm not seeing any hands raised and I'm not seeing anything in the chat. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap things up right there and we'll move into really that City Day. Oh, we do have one quick last minute question from Mayor Cross. Go ahead.
Well, I will delete the long message I was trying to write in the chat. So with print media essentially going away in most of our small communities, Lincoln County is probably going to lose our only print media paper within the year. Is the state going to find a way to change the regulation and the requirement that we print budgets, planning documents, all of that in print media? Because our closest one is the Corvallis Gazette Times, which essentially only covers us under a disaster. Also, I remember something a few years back about the state going to a clearinghouse website, if you will, so people could go right to it, pull up their city and see what announcements they have.
Okay. I see Scott has chimed into this. This seems like a perfect opportunity for Scott and with his general government coverage. Go ahead.
Hi, Mayor. There is a bill that would allow that to happen. I believe it is your senator that dropped that legislation, and you're correct. The league was the one who proposed the legislation to allow for an electronic posting system and subscription system for notices and dissemination of documents. And so happy to re-engage in that conversation as well. I know in Lincoln County, I believe it's cheaper for you to mail your budget to everybody than buy the ad. And there are some other counties in a similar situation. So we're on it.
Okay.
Thank
Super.
you, Scott.
All right. So if you didn't get a chance to get a question, we're going to need to transition into the City Day conversation. If you have questions, send it to one of the lobbyists, send it to me. We'll do our best to make sure you get a response here within the next 24 hours. And we'll go from there. But again, remember, noon to 1 o'clock every Friday for the next 100 and whatever we have left, 130 days left of session, so mid-June. So appreciate everybody joining us today for a quick legislative download. And again, let's transition into City Day. So those of you who've had a chance to attend in the past, or those of you who are new to the system, I think we always find it useful to kind of go through what City Day is going to be like next week. A couple of things. This is going to be big. This is a big deal for us. This is really what kicks off our legislative advocacy each long session. And as I mentioned earlier, and you've certainly seen in our communications over the last several years, we really appreciate every single city getting involved in this legislative advocacy. We, in many cases, depend on your voices. In Salem, they are noticed. I can't tell you, and I suspect every other lobbyist on the call here for the league, we've lost count on how many times we hear from a state legislator asking, well, what does my mayor think? What does a particular council member, or do they have a position on this? And every opportunity that you get throughout the course of the year, that advocacy helps build our effort to pass good stuff, stop bad stuff, and make sure that we're representing your voices across the board in Salem. So City Day next week is on Tuesday, the 28th. Everybody who has registered should have received an email from me earlier this week with the full member packet that has the agenda. It has a full details of white papers that can help you frame some of your message points. And it also has a section in there that I think is important for us, is comments. So when you're going to these meetings with your legislators, make sure that you take the opportunity to take some notes and get those notes back to us. We'll have a table at the convention center that's going to be gathering those notes. You also have the opportunity, obviously, to talk directly with lobbyists during the course of the day. The focus that we'll have, I'll just kind of run through the agenda really quick, is the registration and continental breakfast start out at 7:30 to 9 o'clock in the morning. Our registration level right now, we pretty much capped it and turned off registration electronically earlier this week. There are over 420 individuals signed up this year. This blows way past everything that we've had before. And over 300 of those are members, which is terrific. So your lobby team is definitely looking forward to seeing everybody, and also looking forward to seeing you in the building. Once we get started at 9 o'clock roughly, there's going to be your basic welcoming remarks from Mayor Julie Hoy from Salem, as well as President Jessica Engelke. We are following that up with really legislative leadership in Oregon. So it'll start out with Governor Kotek, move to the Senate Republican leader, Senator Daniel Bonham, Speaker of the House, who is Representative Julie Fahey. Then we move to Rob Wagner, Senate President, and then finish up with Representative Christine Drazen, who is the House Republican leader. Those are really the key individuals in the state that drive policy in Oregon. And hearing from them will be important. Sometimes they'll stick around for some Q&A, but this is an active session. And even though we've got confirmations from everybody it may look a little bit different in the morning. So be patient with the process. Sometimes there's last minute things that happen and we have to adjust the schedule, but really the primary general session goes from 9 to noon. The other thing that's going to be a little bit different this year, we're actually joined by a really large contingent of youth delegates who are going to be participating during the day. Now, they're going to have kind of a concurrent program going on in the afternoon at the Salem Library, but we've got over 80 kids from across different youth councils from Oregon, which is terrific. They're going to get an opportunity to engage with you in the morning with some talking points that they'd like to share that is important to them. And also they're going to try to wrap that into some of the league's priorities that we're focused in on here for the 25 session. The next part of this is really kind of I'll say the nuts and bolts of our legislative advocacy. And we are really kind of focused in on just 4 legislative priorities for City Day. One thing to keep in mind is you're not going to get 30 or 40 minutes with your state elected official. So your lobby team selected 4 issues for you really to kind of concentrate your focus, realizing that there are going to be several other touch points throughout the course of this session. Those 4 include infrastructure and housing development, transportation package, clarifying the time, place, and manner with public camping. Effectively, again, that's that 195-530 or Grants Pass v. Martin. And then transient lodging tax. You're going to have presentations with a lot more detail from each of the portfolio managers on this, and there'll be an opportunity to have some Q&A within that process as well. And then right around lunchtime, you'll have the opportunity to pick up your lunches and go hit the Capitol. And hopefully a number of you have been able to get your legislative meetings set up, and we'll be able to have those. The other thing that we built into this agenda that we did last time around was we wanted to make sure that we had some afternoon sessions, because we realized that you're not going to be meeting for 3 hours with your legislators, and wanted to make sure that you had an opportunity for some engagement with the league and to be able to hit on some important elements and stuff that we're working on. So starting out at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, we actually have National League of Cities Senior Executive and Director of Federal Advocacy, Irma Esparza Diggs. She'll be out talking about the lobbying effort that they're engaged with at the federal level. Obviously, we are at a transition point. A lot of things have been happening this week, some of which are not particularly helpful for cities, especially any city that's involved in infrastructure investments that have been made available through the previous administration. So Irma's going to be there for from 1 until 2 o'clock. We're also going to get an update on our revenue reform work that we've been spending an awful lot of time and energy on over the last several months. Travis Stovall, Mayor Gresham, along with Jenna Jones, who's the lead on that issue, has a presentation to update members on. A lot of good work has been done, and we've also developed some revenue kits and stuff to try to help out folks. The final piece really is kind of a lobbying 201. We have our work that we've done physically on the website. We have a lobbying toolkit that we have put together over the last year with videos and a lot of resources for you. We've done a Lobby 201 in the past, and this is primarily focused on funding. So if you've got a project that needs funding, Nolan Plesha is going to walk you through the process, some of the important things that you have to build into that process to be successful. The final piece that's in the agenda before we get on to the evening is state agencies. We're going to have, I'm counting really quick, 8 state agencies that are going to be there from 3 to 4:45. That ranges from Water Resources Department, State Fire Marshal's Office, Housing and Community Services, Department of Energy, Transportation, Revenue, as well as Business Oregon. So they're all going to be represented there on the tables, and it provides you an opportunity to have some direct engagement with some of their leadership and some of their other staff that will be available. And then finally, we finish off the day from 5 o'clock to 9, which is really kind of a networking reception. It's also going to be really kind of the kickoff for our centennial. There, of course, is going to be food, beverages available, and we're going to have a live band. So one of the things that we want to make sure that you do when you're out and meeting with those legislators is make sure they get invited to that reception. The last time we did this, we had 20 or 30 legislators that showed up. It was great to have them there in a less formal setting to allow for some opportunity to build some relationships and to just get to know each other. Your entire lobby team will be there as well. So that's effectively really what that agenda looks like. As I mentioned, the member packet that you have has effectively, I'll say, everything that you need to know going forward. There'll be a shuttle that's going to be going from the Salem Convention Center to the Capitol that's going to be running every 10 to 15 minutes. We'll be able to get you over there. It's also not too much of a walk. It's about a 10 to 13-minute walk and stuff if the day is nice and not raining and you want to get a little bit of exercise. Keep in mind this year, we continue to be under construction at the Capitol. So not every space is available. And we want to make sure that folks understand to make sure you queue yourself up for your meetings not too far in advance. 10 to 15 minutes should be all you really need. And then once you have the meeting, if at all possible, if you could go back to the convention center, take advantage of some of those session programs with potentially 300 people in the building on top of several lobbyists like ourselves that will be in the building. We have to be aware of some of the fire code issues and don't want to overwhelm building staff. So because of that construction, as I mentioned, we're asking that you understand some of the limitations that we've got with fire code. And once you've had your meetings, please leave unless you've got something that's back to back. That's going to be incredibly helpful to the process. I mentioned on the front end of this, we've got white papers in here. We've got they're all keyed up in terms of what are the 4 focus areas that we're really interested in on Tuesday. And you've got contact information in there for all the lobbyists who work these issues, as I mentioned. So hopefully that's going to give you everything that you need to know. And I think maybe the final piece on here is make sure you take advantage of those note pages and get those back to us. Those will be helpful for us as we're advocating here throughout the course of the session. So with that, I'm going to open this up to questions here for the next 13 minutes or so. Actually, before I do that, it's actually in chat here, but want to make sure that everybody understands are effectively mindful of the potential public meeting law restrictions. So if a quorum of your council will be present at the event, you need to make sure that that's at least communicated. Again, feel free to raise your hand, drop something in the chat. Kevin, am I missing anything? Or my lobby team, am I missing anything out of this rundown?
Not that I can see.
Okay, we'll hold for another minute or so if folks are not sure if they've got a question process-wise. Okay. Kevin, I'm going to go ahead and close it off.
Let's do it.
Yeah, I mean, there's no reason to keep folks on. You want to get to lunch with the 10 minutes or 11 minutes that remain here for the hour. Again, really appreciate everybody joining us. Treat this opportunity to meet with your legislators as a ongoing exercise. This cannot be a one and done conversation. You need to make sure that once you've had a chance to meet with them, follow it up with a simple thank you. Could be a phone call, could be a handwritten note, could be an email. those things are always helpful within that relationship building process. And the final message, I think, when you're meeting with those legislators, be patient with their staff. They're the gatekeepers. The best relationship you can have in the world is with the person who answers the phone. So appreciate it, everybody.
Thank you, Jim. That's going to wrap it up, everybody. Don't forget, we are here with these legislative updates every Friday at noon during the long legislative session. Rough count, we had about 50, preliminary rough count, 56 cities represented on this call today. So thank you, everybody, for showing up. And we look forward to engaging with you further as the legislative session unfolds. And for those of you that are going to be joining us Tuesday, we look forward to seeing you in Salem for City Day at the Capitol. Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful weekend.